Hey guys, Chris from Provo Bees Audio Installation, and today we're doing a 4-channel NVX amplifier on this 2007 FJ Cruiser. In this install, we're going to show you how to install this amplifier under the passenger front seat. We're going to show you how to run all the cable and wiring and tap into the factory system while maintaining the factory 8-inch subwoofer in the rear. Let's get started. Okay, so the chosen location for amplifier is here underneath the passenger front seat. We're going to lay this back here so we can mount the amplifier underneath the seat so it's more protected. Now we have an impact here, and these are 14mm bolts all the way around. We're going to go ahead and remove those so we can tip our seat backwards, giving us enough room to go ahead and get our amplifier mounted. Now what this has done is given us some space to work with here. We're planning on putting our amplifier kind of in this location here. We want to be conscientious of the vents here just so we don't totally block these and make sure those function properly. But that's going to be a good location to mount our amplifier. We're going to do it on a piece of ABS plastic so we can mount it down and make sure nothing slides around because this doesn't have the carpet kit. Let's go ahead and start mocking up our amplifier where it's going to be mounted, and then from here what we're going to do is start running power from the battery through an inline fuse, and then we'll find a good grounding location and get that all set up. Now the amplifier we've chosen to go with in this install today is this NVX 4-channel amplifier. It's the VADM4. It's a micro series amplifier. It's just a little bit bigger than a US dollar. This is nice for its size because you can really hide it anywhere. This is going to power our door speakers as well as our tweeters up in the dash, and our rear speakers, which are essentially tweeters back in the back pillars as well as in the headliner. So we're going to use this amplifier to power all those speakers here. Since we're also running crossovers for our front stage, we're going to mount our crossovers on a piece of ABS plastic along with our amplifier underneath the seat. So we're going to go ahead and get this wired up. If you want to see us install those speakers specifically, we'll have a video here on the channel. We'll throw a card up in the video as well as a link in the description in case you want to know how to replace the speakers in your FJ Cruiser. So what we're going to do at this point is get this amplifier all wired up here and mounted to this, and we're going to mount this piece of ABS plastic underneath the front seat of our FJ, and we need to run power and ground to it. We'll do a line from the battery through an inline fuse. We're going to be running 8 gauge, and we'll also do a ground. And then we also need to do a remote turn on as well as speaker wire outputs. Now we're going to actually run most our speaker wire output from our amplifier. Rather than running new wire to all our speakers, we're going to run the majority of it through 9-wire up into the dash cavity where it's going to connect into the wiring harness behind the radio, because that has speaker lines that go to all the speakers individually. And we're going to show you the wiring harness that we'll make that'll allow us to do that. All right, so once those are removed, go ahead and just give these a nice little tug. Be very careful because you don't want to crack these. It has 3 clips up each side. Start at the bottom, just kind of give it a pull, and from there we have a Phillips on each side. Go ahead and remove those. Okay, so now the rest of this panel is really just held on with clips. Just be very careful. You kind of get your fingers up underneath it. Go ahead and give it a tug. Now you can just leave it there, or you can just disconnect your harnesses here. Now just keep in mind, since we've disconnected this, you do have an airbag light there. So I would not recommend starting your vehicle with this disconnected, just to reduce the risk of tripping an airbag light on the dash. Okay, once that's out of the way, you're gonna have 4 10mm bolts. We're gonna have a socket here that we're gonna go ahead and use to remove those. Okay, once those are all removed, I'm gonna grab that radio, pull it on out. Then as you tip that down, you can disconnect your antenna and then your miscellaneous harnesses here. Press the tabs in and they should come on out. Just like so. Okay. All right, so we're here at the bench. Now, typically speaking, when you're running an amplifier, most people would usually run new speaker wires from the amplifier output to each of your speakers. Well, there's a way around that that's a little bit easier for you, and depending on your wattage, you can easily do this, save you a heartache of running new cable. So generally speaking, with the wire harness adapter, you have one end that will plug into your aftermarket radio, and then the other one will plug into the plugs in the car. Now, usually your speaker wires from your radio would be hooked up to the speaker wire output adapter here, which would run to all your speakers. Well, what we've done is cut those, or not even wired them up, and instead we have these bare wires that would run to all the speakers here. What we're going to do is use this cable called 9-conductor wire. Now it's called that because it has 9 wires within this blue shielding, has all 4 speaker pairs as well as an amplifier turn on, so 9 wires total. And what we're going to use this for is one end is going to connect to the speaker outputs on our amplifier, and then the other end we're going to wire into our speaker wires, which go to our doors and the dash and the rear speakers. And it's really convenient. So rather than relying on our aftermarket radios output, we're going to just cap those off. We're not going to use those, and instead from our amplifier output, we're going to run this cable, tap into our harness adapter here, and this will essentially carry our amplified signal to all our speakers in the car, which is pretty cool. So what we're going to go ahead and do here is match these color for color, which is super nice. And then remember, this other end will go to our amplifier output, and this will just carry our amplified signal everywhere it needs to go in the car. So let's go ahead and get this soldered up. Okay, so we went ahead and connected all our amplifier speaker output wires into our harness, which will take that signal to all the door speakers, dash speakers, and C-pillar speakers, and everything else in the car, just all to our speakers, which is super, super nice. What we're going to do now at this point, after we got them all soldered, we're going to move our heat shrink up and over our connections and shrink these tubes down with a heat gun. Okay, so at this point, we're going to go ahead and get our harness all wrapped up. We're using some Tesa tape to protect all our wiring in the dash here itself. Once we get everything wrapped up, basically this portion is all ready to go. We need to reinstall our harness back in the dash to our aftermarket radio. We're going to cap off the speaker wires that we're not going to be using and run our 9-conductor cable from outside the dash underneath the front seat. Okay, we got our harness all wrapped back up here. We have our speaker wire output from our aftermarket amplifier. This will run up through our 9-conductor cable, up into the harness, into the plug's main wiring harness here, and then to the door, to the dash, and all the other speakers in the vehicle, which is super nice. And this avoids us having the need to run new speaker wire to each and individual speaker from the amplifier. So that's a quick and easy way to do so. So this harness is all good to go. Let's go ahead and put this back into our FTH Cruiser and run this wire to the amplifier output that'll be underneath the front seat. And again, we'll strip this back here. We'll run this, we'll connect this in the dash, run this down underneath the dash to the front seat area, and this will go to the outputs on our amplifier. Okay, one last note before we get our 9-conductor cable, our speaker harness output from our amplifier all wired in. That'll go up to our harness, in the vehicle and then to all the speakers. If you have the factory subwoofer in the trunk of your FJ, you have to keep in mind that that factory amplifier, to push that factory sub, it doesn't operate off of any other speakers or provide signal to any other speakers. Essentially, all it is just for the sub specifically. Now, because that is, if you look at your factory radio here, there's no pre-out, and then there's no specific harness that goes directly to the sub. It just didn't exist. The way that Toyota wired their subwoofer is they just ran a line and tapped into the rear speakers of the factory radio to supply signal to the amp for the sub in the back. The issue that we may run into, if we're going to go ahead and amplify our signal, it's going to cause us two issues, because if we just go ahead and hook up our amplifier to all our speakers, put more power to the rears, that's also going to put a ton more power to that factory amplifier in terms of the signal, and it may cause that factory amp to distort. Second issue is if we're setting up crossovers on our aftermarket amplifier, let's say we put a high pass filter, that subwoofer amp, the sub and amp in the back, the factory system, is not going to get the right frequencies because we're setting a crossover on this amp. So I found a workaround that'll actually work pretty well in this scenario. Since in our radio setup, we're not going to be using the speaker outputs, because instead we're using the RCA outputs for a low level signal to our amp, we have unused speaker wire outputs from our chosen radio. What I've done here is I've actually just soldered on some leads to those unused speakers. And what we're going to use is that internal amplifier on our aftermarket radio to power our factory amplifier in the back. But since the factory system relied on that high level signal to the back, we're just trying to match that as close as possible. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and use the unused speaker output from our radio. We're going to run our own line to the back, and this will be our signal to the factory amplifier, because we don't want to send our crossed over amplified signal, which will just cause our factory sub to distort. So this is our workaround to make that work. Now, if you remember, we ran from our unused speaker wire output from the radio. Since we don't want to amplify the signal that goes to our factory amplifier for our sub here, we ran those cables all the way up here. And again, this is just the regular speaker wire output from the radio that wasn't being used, since we're using an aftermarket amplifier and the RCAs. We tapped into that, and then we ran that into this plug here, because that'll feed the high level signal into our factory amp. So this just runs off of the head unit power rather than the amplified signal from the amplifier. And we just cut those, and it's actually standard aftermarket wiring color, so left and right, the whites and the grays, and we just went right in there, and then that'll go into our factory amp, and then we'll install our aftermarket Scar Audio replacement sub for this cavity. Now this Scar is a dual voice coil 2 ohm, which is identical to the factory one here, so it's a perfect replacement in this location. All right, so just an update on wiring up our amplifier. We made this ABS piece of plastic that'll actually fit right underneath the seat, and we'll bolt it down using some self-tappers into the cross member there. We mounted our 4-channel amplifier and our crossovers, because we're running crossovers for our front stage. So basically here we have our speaker output, which are these two harnesses here. The purple and green are our rear speakers, and those will just go straight through. Our front stage for our front door and tweeters are the white and gray, and they go into the inputs of our crossover. So you see those two inputs there. And then we have the woofer and tweeter outputs that we need to wire up here. So what we're going to do is do the mid-range woofer back into the main harness, which will go to the doors. And then we'll run our own tweeter wires up to the tweeters. So this will connect into our 9-conductor cable, which will connect all the way up to the harness of the car, and then from that main harness to our speakers, which is pretty cool. So we don't have to run new speakers except for tweeters. Now, if you want to see the full install of our tweeters and mid-range woofers in the doors, want to see that video, we'll have a link in the description as well as a card up above. At this point, we just need to get this all mounted, get our power and ground hooked up, and then run RCAs up to our aftermarket radio there. That'll be up in the dash, and connect in our speaker wire and remote turn-on wire. Okay, so we got our board in here just temporarily so we can start finishing hooking up wires. Our output from our crossovers and our amplifier, we soldered into our 9-conductor cable, and we'll put some heat shrink over that, and then that'll go up and it goes right into the dash there. Just kind of fit it through here so we have plenty of space. And then what that 9-conductor cable, as you saw on the bench previously, it's wired into our harnesses here, so as it goes through the factory plugs, it supplies the signal to our factory speakers. Now for our tweeters up here in the dash, we're gonna run our own output from our crossovers, and that's why we have this cable here. But other than that, that's about it. We just need to run our RCAs so we can plug into our aftermarket radio and finish up our power and our ground. Now for our ground, if you pull this up, there's a factory grounding location right there. We're going to use that. We'll just clean it up with a wire brush just so it's nice and clean and free of any resistance and finish up our install. Okay, so we pulled the carpet up here and I removed that 10mm factory grounding location. With the negative off the battery, we did so we can clean the paint off so we have a really good connection. And now we're going to attach our 8-gauge ground to that location and also reinstall the factory grounding spot as well. Okay, so we got that all back together, and our ground will come out right into the ground of the amplifier. All right, so we're here under the hood. We remove the negative off the battery as we safely work on this car, and what we're going to do is tap into our positive post here for power for amplifier, and we're going to run an inline fuse, and we're going to mount it kind of in that area. And then we could go through the firewall through that grommet, but since our amplifier is going to be under the passenger front seat, we're actually going to go through this side, and there's already existing wiring up and over the engine that we can zip tie to. So what we're going to do is go up and over, and then we're going to go through that grommet. Now there's two ways. You can go through this grommet here, or you can cut this like little nipple off here, and that'll provide you a safe passage through the existing grommet. It's your choice. We're probably going to go through there, and that'll have a nice clean run to the amplifier underneath the front seat. Okay, so we cut the nipple off there, and it's just an easy pass through. We ran our wire inside the cabin of the FJ, and then ran the extra up and over, zip tying it along the factory loom there, along here, and then we came right here. Now we had a leftover piece of ABS plastic. So what we use that ABS plastic for is we snagged the bolt here and cut it to size, and we mounted our fuse holder on there so it's nice and solid. And then we went to the positive post of the battery. So that's about it there. Once we're all good to go, we can put the negative back on. But other than that, everything's done up underneath the hood. Let's show you how we've run this inside the FJ to the amplifier. So you can see that grommet right up there. That's where it came out. We ran our cable through just these supports here. Up underneath, it came out there, and then to the positive side of the amplifier. We got our ground all done. That's all good to go, and you saw us do that previously. Other than that, we just need to run our RCAs along with our speaker wire so we can connect it into the radio up above. Basically, at this point, we're just about ready to get the radio back in and test. All right, so we're ready to get our radio now reinstalled here in the dash. Now with our wiring harness, the cool thing is it just plugs into the 3 factory plugs, just like so. And then we'll tuck everything just back here in the dash so it's nice and safe and out of the way. Okay, so I got all connected here, double checking, looks good. Okay, the radio's all back in. As you remember, we've got our RCAs, remote turn on wire, and speaker wire output all connected into the radio and the harness behind the radio. Got our cables all just tucked up underneath this panel. They come out here. Amp's all good. We just need to do a quick vacuum up underneath here. And then once we're totally done with our adjustments, we'll go ahead and mount these using some self-tappers into this crossbeam. We just set our gains with a DD1 by SMD. That's all good to go. This turned out super nice and clean, all tucked away. And we have plenty of space up underneath here for the vent to pass the air through without interfering with our equipment. Turned out pretty cool. So at this point, all we need to do is a test. Okay, so we got everything all reassembled for our amplifier. Let's go ahead and give it a test. Set an open course. Ton more power up to the front channels and the overall surround sound here in the Cruiser. So at this point, that's about it for this video. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe. If you have any questions about what we did here, throw a comment below. If you want other helpful videos, such as how we replace the front speakers here in this FJ, we'll have a link down in the description. And we also did a radio install on this as well. So a lot of good content. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you in the next video.